So a question for you to kick off. Who's been to Monarto, the zoo? Yeah? Everyone's been to Monarto. Okay, I've been to Monarto too. There's all sorts of animals at Monarto, right? When you go out there, there's all sorts of, some animals, you know, there's animals out there you've never heard of before, right? But there's all these animals out there. But if you're like me, if you go to Monarto, you look at all the animals, but everyone wants to see the lions at Monarto, right? There's a thing about the lions, and everyone's always, even when you're on the bus, you know, they show you all the other animals, and then there's this real sort of build up and excitement. And I don't know about you, but when you go to Monarto and you think of seeing the lions, I kind of imagine it will be like this, right? You know, be sort of, you know, you'd be kind of up close and you know, you see the big, you know, that's what you kind of imagine. The reality is when you get to Monarto and you see the lions, it's usually something a bit more like this, sort of at best. You know, you see a lion a long way away and they're not looking at you and they don't care about you and whatever. But what you really wish, I should say, so there's this, right? What you really wish is that you could be one of those people that could afford to pay all the extra money and to get the up-close experience of the lions. You know, this thing? Where you can get literally this close to a lion and you put some meat in the tong things and you get to feed the lion because you think that would be cool, you know, to get that close to a real lion, that would be good. But let's be honest, that's good, but there's still a cage in the way. What all of us wish, I know you don't see that, but what we secretly wish is this was our experience of Monarto, right? This is what you actually secretly wish Monarto looked like for you. When someone says you can be close to the lions, isn't that what you wish close looked like? It's a real guy, his name's Dean Schneider. He lives with lions and you can look him up and whatever. And I'm actually more scared of my cat than he is of that cat. But it's true, isn't it? When you think of close, when you think of being up close with a lion, there's a secret part of you that wishes that that's what close looked like. And I came across this guy during the week and I was looking at some of his stuff and hearing a bit about his life. And it struck me as I was listening to that Christianity can be a bit like seeing the lions at Monarto. Right? Someone promises you that if you come to Christianity, if you get involved in God, if you do the God thing, someone promises you that you will be able to connect with God. Someone promises you that you'll be able to come close to God, that you'll be able to have, people talk about having a personal relationship with God, right? And so lots of us expect this level of close, right? But the reality is, for lots of us, you kind of come to church and you do the God thing and it feels a bit more like this. Like God's there, you can see him, but he's sort of distant and feels a bit disengaged with you, and you know, it's not really a sense of close. But there's a secret little part of anyone who's ever hungered for God, even just a little bit, that wishes that you and God were a bit more like this, right? That wishes that this was what close looked like with God. And the Bible story tells us there's a reason that you wish you had this kind of close with God, and the reason is that you were created for this kind of close with God. That whether you know it or not, and whether you grew up with an understanding of God or not, whether you consider yourself even right now a Christian or not, whatever you think about God or whatever you think God thinks about you, the story of the Bible is that every human on the planet was created for this kind of experience with God. In the beginning, and I mean the actual beginning, like way back when things really began, God and people were close. They were living together. It's a picture of a garden, God and people living together, and it was free and it was abundant. God and people were living together in a sort of a partnership, a unity, a togetherness. There was this idea that you couldn't tell where heaven finished and earth began. You couldn't tell where God's life and humanity began and end. It was that close. But the story of the garden didn't last, because people decided they didn't want to live God's way. They wanted close, but they didn't want it on God's terms. They wanted it on their terms, and like we're still the same today, right? You know, we all want to be the boss of our own lives. We don't want anyone else telling us what to do. We want to decide what's right. We want to decide what's true. And so those first people, Adam and Eve, decided that they wanted to go their own way. They wanted to do life on their own terms, and so they rebel, they walk away from God, and they take control of their own lives. At least they try and take control of their own lives. It actually doesn't work. It turns into a complete mess, right? They try and take control of their own lives, but greed and hate and violence and death enter the world as a result. And the worst thing about this whole picture is that the sin that they create separates people and God. And the closeness that people experience with God is broken. And people and God become separate and distanced. And this idea of close disappears. And then something amazing happens. Something that you would never expect. You would certainly never expect it from the God of the universe, because God reaches out to people. God reaches out to this broken, messed up humanity. In Exodus 29, the kind of Genesis, the first book of the Bible, Exodus is the second one, so still really early in the picture, God speaks and he says this to humanity. He says, I will dwell among the Israelites. They're the people of God at the time. I will dwell among the Israelites and I will be their God. They will know that I am the Lord their God. This is God saying, I'm coming back. I'm coming back to live amongst people again. I'm coming back to be the God of humanity again. And this promise, this promise gets repeated all over the Bible. Leviticus 26, God says, I will put my dwelling place among you. I will not abhor you. That means I won't hate you. I won't be distanced from you anymore. I will walk among you and be your God, and you will be my people. In Ezekiel 37, God says, my dwelling place will be with them, talking about humanity, talking about people. I will be their God, and they will be my people. There's just a couple of verses. These sorts of verses are all over the Old Testament part of the Bible. God promising that there's going to come a time where He is going to come back and be close again to humanity. I will be their God and they will be my people. He's saying, just the way that it was in the beginning. The same way that it was for Adam and Eve in the garden, I'm coming back so that you can experience, so that all of us can experience that kind of close with God again. And along the way, God's dropping all these little hints and all these little breadcrumbs about when and how that's going to happen. Giving people little signs and little hints about Him coming back. Isaiah was a prophet in the Old Testament part of our Bible. A prophet means that he was someone that was connected to God and that God spoke to people through Isaiah. And in chapter 11, God says this through Isaiah. He's talking to people and he says, "A shoot will spring up from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from his roots will bear fruit." He said there's a new branch that's going to grow out of Jesse's family tree. Now, if you ask ChatGPT who Jesse in the Bible is, it will tell you that Jesse is King David's father. You heard of King David, the really famous guy? Jesse's his dad. And so Isaiah's saying there's something new. There's something new that God's going to do through the family tree of Jesse and King David. And so you're supposed to read that and think, is this part of God's coming close? What is this new thing? What is this shoot, this thing that's going to spring up out of King David, out of Jesse's family tree? Is that going to be part of God coming close? Micah was another one of the prophets in the Old Testament who spoke for God. And he says this in chapter 5, verse 2. He says, "But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from old, from ancient times." Bethlehem is this tiny town. It's a tiny town no one's really ever heard of, a tiny town in the region of Judah. And God says, out of you is going to come one who will be a ruler. And not just any ruler. He says, a ruler whose origins are from old, from ancient times. And you're supposed to read that and think, a ruler like ancient times. Are we talking a ruler like back in the garden? Are we talking that kind of ruler? Is that kind of ruler going to come out of this tiny place called Bethlehem? Another time that God spoke through Isaiah, he says this to him. He says, this is in Isaiah chapter 7. He says, "The Lord himself will give you a sign." This one's less obvious, a bit more obvious than the last one. "The Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and he will call him Emmanuel." Now, you just think Emmanuel's a name. Emmanuel in Hebrew literally means God with us. Right? So God's being a lot less subtle here. He's saying this is what God with us is going to look like. This will be the sign of God with us. A virgin will conceive and give birth to a son. God's coming back. This God coming back to be close is going to happen in the form of a person, in the form of a son, and his mum's going to be a virgin, which is a bit weird, but okay, let's go with that. One of the poets who read, these are all these little breadcrumbs and hints, right? One of the poets who wrote one of the Psalms, inspired by God, he wrote this probably 1,000 years or so before Isaiah. He wrote this: "May the kings of Tarshish and of distant shores bring tribute to him. May the kings of Sheba and Seba present him gifts. May all the kings bow down to him." Now I get we're a bit scrappy on the geography, but Tarshish and Sheba and Seba, these are very distant kingdoms, right? These are countries that are a long way away. The psalmist is saying that kings from faraway countries will come and they will bring him gifts. They will bow down to him. And you're supposed to read that and think, who is him? Is him part of the close story? Is him that him? Is him the him that Isaiah will talk about? Are we talking about the same him? This stuff's all hidden all over the Bible story, right? Coming through the family line of David, born in Bethlehem, born of a virgin, kings bringing gifts. Like, you couldn't make this stuff up, right? These are breadcrumbs all over the pages of scriptures. They're all pointing toward this single moment in time, right? They're all pointing to a time when God says that He is going to come in person and dwell among us and be with us. That there's going to be a time when God and people are going to reconnect. When God will be our God and we will be His people. There is a time coming where God is going to come close again. The point of all this is that the Christmas story, as we come to it in a few weeks, the Christmas story isn't just a cute story to engage the kids, right? Joseph, as in Mary and Joseph, he is a direct ancestor of Jesse and King David. Mary and Joseph travelled to Bethlehem. You remember that part of the story? Mary got pregnant while she was still a virgin. The kings came from distant countries and brought gifts. The Christmas story isn't just a cute story. God is fulfilling 4,000 years of waiting and hoping that God will come close again to humanity. That's what the Christmas story is trying to tell you. The reality of the Christmas story is that story, not that story, the reality of what happened on that day is that Christmas is a moment when God comes to dwell with people, that God comes to live with you. That's what the Christmas story is trying to tell you. That God can be your God again, that you can be His people again, you can be His person again. And every single detail in that Christmas story is a little nod to say Jesus is the one. Can you see that? All of the breadcrumbs that God has dropped through 4,000 years of history between Adam and Eve and the coming of Jesus, all of those little breadcrumbs tie into every single detail in the story. Everything that you see in a nativity, there is nothing there by accident. God has arranged everything in a way that you're supposed to look at every single detail of the story and say, Jesus is the one, and this is the moment when God is coming back to be close to humanity. This is the moment when I can be God's person again and He can be my God again. That's what the Christmas story is trying to tell us. It's trying to tell us that Jesus is the one who's come to reconnect humanity to God. That Jesus is the one who's come to in a mental way to take humanity back to the garden. Remember what we said about the garden, this place of freedom and abundance where people and God lived together, where you couldn't tell where heaven ended and earth began? The Christmas story is telling you that the door to Eden has been cracked open again and you're invited to come in. That's what God's trying to tell you in the details of the Christmas story. That's the kind of close that God is offering you again at Christmas. Now, we miss this because we're on the other side of Christmas, right? But for those 4,000 years between Adam and Eve and Jesus, for 4,000 years, the reality of the Christmas story was just a dream to people. It was just one of those one-day dreams. You know, one day wouldn't it be good if? Imagine if one day. And then after 4,000 years of waiting, there were shepherds living out in the fields nearby, keeping watch over their flocks at night. And an angel of the Lord, it's a way of saying a messenger from God, appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them. It's a way of saying that God is close, right? Because the glory shining. The glory of the Lord shone around them and they were terrified, but the angel said to them, "Do not be afraid. I bring you good news that will cause great joy for all the people. Today in the town of David, which is another name for the city of Bethlehem, today in the town of David, a Saviour has been born to you, and he is the Messiah, the Lord. The good news that will cause great joy for all the people is that today is the day that God's chosen to come close again, right? That's the good news. Yeah. The good news of great joy for all people is that it's this day. Right? This is the day. This is what the angels come to say. Today's the day. After Jesus all grows up, after the life and the death and the resurrection of Jesus, Paul, one of the leaders in the early church, he would write a letter and he would describe this day like this. This is in Philippians chapter 2. He would say that Jesus, who being in very nature God, in other words, Jesus who was fully God, who was 100% God, made himself nothing, gave that all away by taking the very nature, the essence of a servant, being made in human likeness. This is the Christmas story, that God gives up everything that he has in heaven to come and be squeezed into an ordinary, dirty human body so that he can get close to us. That the God who created everything, the God, right? Not just a God, the God that is above all the other gods, the gods that is better than all the other gods, that God became human and came to be with us so that we could be close to him again. So that you could be saved and rescued from the sin that is separating you from God. So that you could be returned to the garden and live again with him. In that place of freedom and abundance and joy and peace. That's why joy and peace and love, that's why we use those words at Christmas, right? Because that's the promise of Christmas, that you can come back into that place with Jesus. That's the good news of Christmas. That's actually the good news of Christianity. That you can come back into that place in your life. And so this series that we're going to do for a few weeks in the lead up to Christmas, as we get ready for Christmas, I just don't want you to miss how genuinely cool this is. Seriously, the point of what we're going to try and do before Christmas is to get you to look at Christmas differently this year. You guys want to come up? I want to try and get you to see and remind myself just how incredible the birth of Jesus really is. I want you to see what God is doing at Christmas. And I say that because I get it. It's so easy for all of us to take Christmas for granted, right? Because it happens every year. And it's been happening every year for all of our lives. And it'll happen again next year. And we've all heard the story. And it's so easy to come to this time of year and go, I've heard the Christmas story before. I know the Christmas story. You know, Jesus is the reason for the season. I know that. I get that. You know, tick the box, move on. But here's the thing that these details in the Christmas story are trying to tell us. Christmas isn't about knowing the story. Christmas is about knowing God. Christmas is about this moment when God comes close. In this picture, Christmas isn't about saying, I believe there's a lion. Christmas is about saying, it's my lion. And I'm this close. Christmas is God reaching out to you and saying, I miss you desperately. I love you so much that I cannot bear to be distanced from you. I can't take being disconnected from you. I want to be close to you again. And Christmas, in that sense, is an invitation. Because God is so kind and gracious that He would never force this on any of us. He comes close, but then He gives us a choice. He reaches out a hand, but He doesn't force you to grab it. You get to decide. You get to decide if you will take the hand that reaches out to you in the Christmas story. The God with us, I will be their God, and you can be His person again. You get to choose whether you will take that hand that is reaching out or not. And I just wanted to put it to you today. That there's a God who loves you and is reaching out to you. And the Christmas story is God making good on His promise to come close to humanity again. To pick you up, to rescue you out of your sin and mess, to rescue me out of my sin and mess, that you and I might be close to Him again.